Hello and welcome back to the Limitless Performer podcast, the podcast where we talk about well-being in the performing arts, because being your best on stage starts with looking after yourself off stage. So recently I've been seeing this trend on TikTok. You've probably seen it too, where people post those carousels saying 2025 is going to be my year, and then cut to a list of all the chaotic or unexpected things that actually happened. It's funny but also kind of real. It got me thinking, because I did the same thing at the start of this year. I wrote down a list of goals, things I wanted to do, the person that I wanted to become, and when I've looked back at it recently, I realised some of those goals I surpassed, but some I've quietly given up on, and there's others I'm still in the middle of figuring out. It really made me reflect on this idea of goal setting and how we imagine our future selves, the version of us we picture at the start of the year or at the start of a new chapter, compared to the person who we actually are right now. And it's funny because we're getting to that time of year again. I know you may not want to hear me say it, but we're in November. Suddenly, we're going to be bombarded by new year, new me messaging. The wellness industry starts trying to sell us this idea that if we haven't completely transformed our lives by now, we've somehow failed that year. Or we start telling ourselves, I'll just wait until January to change. But honestly, you can change whenever you want. A random Tuesday evening in November works just as well as January 1st. So this week, I wanted to pause and ask you the same question I've been asking myself lately. Are you where you thought you'd be right now? And I don't just mean in the big, dramatic life purpose kind of way, though that is part of it. I mean the small day-to-day sense. Maybe you've had a quiet few weeks. Maybe a contract ended, or you haven't had many auditions lately, and then you scroll through Instagram and see people posting about panto announcements, or tours, or brand new projects, and suddenly that little voice in your head says, should I be further along? And here's the thing. That question, am I where I thought I'd be, is one that most performers carry quietly. It doesn't go away once you graduate or once you book your first show. It follows you through every chapter, because in this industry, there is no clear ladder. There's no timeline that tells you what on track even looks like. So in today's episode, I want to unpack that a little. We'll talk about what it really means to measure progress in a career that has no straight path, how comparison can either drain your joy or actually fuel your growth, and how to redefine what success looks like on your own terms. Because you might not be where you thought you'd be right now, but that doesn't mean you're not exactly where you're supposed to be. When you graduate drama school, or even before that when you're training, you usually have a silent little timeline in your head. You might not write it down, but it's there. It sounds like, I'll have an agent before I graduate, I'll book my first job within 6 months, and I'll be in the West End by 25. It's not that those goals are bad. They're often what keeps us motivated, but they can quietly start to control how we measure our worth. I remember on our last day of drama school, one of my teachers said, "Don't email me in 6 months asking why you're not in the West End yet." And everyone laughed, but secretly I remember thinking, well, I'll try not to be that person, but maybe I'll actually make it by then. There was this quiet belief that if I worked hard enough, ticked all the boxes, and stayed focused, I'd follow this invisible timeline of success. But this industry doesn't move in straight lines, it moves in waves. Sometimes you're working non-stop, and sometimes it's crickets. Sometimes everything clicks, and sometimes it feels like you're shouting into a void. You can do everything right, show up to class, audition relentlessly, network, train, and still find yourself just sitting and waiting for the phone to ring. Because the truth is, performing careers aren't built like corporate ones. There's no promotion ladder, no guaranteed next step. Outside of the industry, it can feel like everyone else has clearer milestones. Friends who work in offices talk about pay rises, job titles, or buying homes. There's a rhythm to their progression that feels tangible. Meanwhile, ours is invisible. Our milestones are things like Finally feeling confident singing that song that used to terrify you. Finally finding joy again after rejection. Learning a new skill. Or simply surviving a month burnout free. And because those wins don't always look like success from the outside, we start to question them. We think, if it's not visible, is it valid? But it absolutely is. Because sometimes your biggest growth doesn't happen when you're booked and busy. It happens in the quiet seasons, in the weeks when you're not performing, but you're redefining what performing means to you. When you're learning how to take care of yourself as a person first and as a performer second. I think we need to start looking at success less like a ladder and more like a landscape. One that's full of winding paths, unexpected detours, resting spots, and completely new routes you didn't even know existed. Because you might not be on the timeline that you imagined, but maybe, just maybe, that's because you're on the one that's actually meant for you. So let's talk about comparison. You open Instagram and within about 30 seconds, it feels like everyone's thriving but you. Someone from your year just landed a West End role. Someone else is on a cruise in the Caribbean. Another person's suddenly an influencer doing a brand shoot that looks like it belongs in Vogue. And suddenly your brain starts spiraling. They're doing amazing. They're busy. They're happy. And me, I'm falling behind? It's wild how quickly that happens. One scroll and all the gratitude that you felt this morning disappears into this pit of quiet comparison. And it's even trickier when it's people you love. Maybe you felt jealous of a friend's success and immediately felt guilty for it. Because you're genuinely happy for them. But also, there's this ache inside of you that whispers, why not me? That inner conflict can feel awful. Because you don't want to be a bitter friend, but you can't help noticing how their win highlights where you feel stuck. In the episode, The Psychology of Career Jealousy from the Psychology of Your 20s podcast, they talk about something that really resonated with me. Jealousy isn't actually about envy or resentment. It's not about disliking someone for their success. It's about your identity. Here's how it works. When someone close to you achieves something that you also value, maybe it's a role you've been dreaming of, a contract, or even a creative milestone, it activates what psychologists call reflective comparison. Your brain sees, we're similar, so if they've done it, why haven't I? And instantly a little voice starts creeping in, whispering, am I behind? Am I failing? But here's the thing, it's not personal. It's not about your friend, your colleague, or your peer. It's just your mind trying to make sense of your own progress, because we humans naturally look for markers, evidence that we're moving forward, that we're growing. And in an industry like ours, where progress isn't linear and milestones are sometimes invisible, seeing someone else hit a highlight can feel sharp. What's really happening is that you're using someone else's success as a mirror. Your subconscious is measuring yourself against them, and when that reflection doesn't match your expectations, it stings. It's like seeing a photo of your reflection in a funhouse mirror. It's distorted, not a full picture, but it still makes you flinch. And here's where it gets interesting. Jealousy in this sense can actually be a signal, not a threat. It tells you what matters to you, what you care about, what's part of your identity and your goals. The key is learning how to notice it without letting it eat away at your confidence or your joy. Because once you understand that it's about your own reflection, not a judgment of your worth, you can start to respond differently. You can use it as curiosity instead of criticism. But a way you can reframe it is, this jealousy is information. You can learn to listen to it without shame, and it can become one of your best teachers. Instead of thinking, why not me? Try asking, what about their journey excites me or inspires me? What is this feeling showing me about what I want more of in my own life? That tiny mindset shift from criticism to curiosity is huge. Their success doesn't mean you failed. It just shows you what's possible. Someone else's timeline doesn't diminish yours. It expands the map. It proves that good things can happen, that opportunities do exist, and that your version might simply be taking a different route. If your dream has happened to someone else, that just means it's possible. It can happen to you too. And let's talk boundaries. If scrolling makes you feel like you're constantly behind, curate your feed. You can mute people for a little bit of time. Unfollow industry pages that make you feel anxious instead of inspired. You don't owe anyone access to your piece. Remember, social media is a highlight reel, not a diary. You're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's opening night. You can even anchor yourself with a little affirmation when you feel that pang of comparison coming up. Something like, I'm not behind, I'm just on a different chapter of the same story. Because that's really what it is. You're all in the same book, you've just turned to different pages. And it's one of the most freeing things you'll ever realize. You can't grow as a person until you learn to celebrate those around you instead of resenting them. When you can genuinely cheer for others, not out of forced positivity, but from a place of knowing that their light doesn't diminish yours, that's when you know you're expanding. Because true confidence isn't, I'm better than you, it's, I'm inspired by you, and I'm still on my way. Let's talk about progress. Because in this industry, it's so easy to think that progress only counts when it's visible. A new credit on Spotlight, a new post that says, I am so excited to announce that, another line on your CV. But the truth is, most progress as a performer happens off stage. It's the kind that doesn't get applause or a press release or even a well done from anyone but you. Let's talk about those invisible wins. Progress is showing up to a class even when you didn't feel like it. It's recording that self-tape when your confidence was low. It's recovering from burnout and realizing that rest is productive too. It's being brave enough to take a risk. Maybe you started teaching, creating your own work, or exploring another creative outlet, and instead of seeing it as giving up, you started seeing it as expanding. That's growth. Progress isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet consistency. Sometimes it's sitting in uncertainty without giving up on yourself. I personally think we need to start celebrating those micro milestones, the little internal shifts that don't make it onto a CV, but change everything about how you show up. More examples are when you handle a rejection better than you used to, or when you don't spiral after a no, you just move on with a little bit of perspective, or when you can rest without guilt, or when you stop needing external validation to know that you are good at what you do. Those are the moments that quietly shape your resilience, and in an industry as unpredictable as this one, resilience is a real measure of longevity. The thing is, most of us were trained to chase external validation, to crave feedback, grades, applause, contracts. It's part of performing. We're literally conditioned to be seen, to be chosen. But internal validation, the quiet, grounded self-assurance, that's what keeps you steady between jobs. You don't need a contract to prove that you're moving forwards. You don't need a role to validate your worth. Sometimes progress is just still loving the craft, still feeling excited by it, even after rejection, still choosing to show up even when no one's watching. That's the kind of progress that sustains you, not the fleeting career high kind, but the slow, soulful kind. If success isn't a ladder, maybe it's more like a garden. Some seasons are all growth and colour and sunshine, and others are quieter, resting, rooting, preparing for what's next. But both are essential. So, if you're in a quieter chapter right now, that doesn't mean you've fallen behind. It just means you're in the part of your story where the foundation is forming. And trust me, that's still movement. Because maybe the question isn't, am I where I thought I'd be? But rather, am I still becoming the person I'd hoped to become? I wanted to share a little personal story because I've had a lot of reframing when it comes to what progress looks like. A few months ago, I met up with a friend from drama school for coffee. We hadn't seen each other properly in ages, and I remember feeling this quiet pit in my stomach as I walked there. That voice saying, "They've been working constantly, you are so behind." And sure enough, as we caught up, they told me about the tours they'd been on, the West End contracts, the dream roles, and I found myself shrinking inside. Not because I wasn't happy for them, I genuinely was, but because that familiar feeling of comparison crept in, that tiny whisper of, why haven't I had that yet? And then halfway through the conversation, they said something that completely flipped my perspective. They said, "Honestly, I've been really envious of you." And I just sat there like, what? They went on to say how they admired that I'd built something of my own, that I'd been living independently in some lovely places, that I was in a stable long-term relationship, that I'd built a business, gotten a degree, and was using my voice to actually help people. And it stopped me in my tracks, because I'd been so focused on what I hadn't achieved, the contracts, the credits, that I'd just completely overlooked everything that I had. Not just the achievements, but the growth, the maturity, the purpose that had come from carving out my own path. Now, it definitely isn't the path that I pictured when I left drama school. If you told me back then that my work would one day revolve around well-being, mindset, strength, and supporting performers, I probably would have laughed, because I thought success only looked one way: a stage, an audience, a spotlight. But I've realized something important. Sometimes you're exactly where you need to be, not because it looks how you imagined, but because it's teaching you something that will prepare you for what's next. The truth is, the work I do now, this podcast, these conversations, this community, grew from the moments that I once labelled as failure. The quiet, uncertain seasons, the why not me moments, the pauses between auditions. That's where I learned empathy, perspective, and a new kind of confidence, one that didn't rely on external validation. So if you're listening to this and thinking, this isn't where I thought I'd be, maybe take a second to look again. You might not be off track. You might just be on a different one, a slower one, a deeper one, a more meaningful one. The version of you you're becoming right now might actually be the foundation for something bigger than you ever planned, because sometimes the detour is the direction. I want to finish today's episode by slowing things down and turning this reflection towards you. You've spent the last 20 minutes listening, nodding, maybe thinking about where you are and where you'd hoped you'd be, but now I want you to actually check in with yourself. If you can, take a deep breath. If you're walking, keep this as a mental exercise. If you're sitting somewhere quiet, maybe grab your journal or make a little voice note to yourself. I did this with my notebook a few days ago, and it gave me some much needed clarity. The first prompt is, think about the version of you from 5 years ago. Where were you living? Who were you surrounded by? What did you dream about? Now, imagine them looking at you today. What would they think of where you are now? What would they be proud of, even the small, quiet things? Maybe it's how you handle rejection now. Maybe it's the boundaries you've learned to set. Maybe it's the fact that you're still showing up for your craft, even when it feels like no one's clapping for you. Next, look forward, 5 years ahead. What version of you do you want to meet? One who feels calm, fulfilled, and proud of how they spend their days. What tiny choices could you make this week that your future self might thank you for? It could be sending an email you've been avoiding, resting properly this weekend, or finally reaching out to a friend that you've been meaning to check in with. Small shifts lead to huge changes, but they start with awareness. And if you want something practical to take away from this episode, try this little check-in ritual. Sit down with a cup of tea and your notebook and ask yourself 3 questions. Firstly, In what ways have I grown this year that have nothing to do with my CV? Second, where can I be a little kinder to myself about my progress? And third, what's one thing I can do this week that aligns with the person that I'm becoming? You might be surprised at how much you've already achieved, just in quieter, more meaningful ways. Because you're not just building a career, you are building a life. And every season, every detour, every pause is all part of that process. As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this. You are not behind, you are becoming. The path isn't meant to look like anyone else's. Your journey is yours, with its own seasons, detours, and quiet milestones. Maybe you're not where you thought you'd be, and that's okay. Maybe that's because you're meant to grow into someone even more grounded, creative, and self-aware before the next big opportunity comes along. Take a moment to really sit with that, to let yourself off the hook, to notice how far you've already come, the skills you've developed, the lessons you've learned, the resilience that you have built. If today's episode sparked something for you, I'd love for you to carry that reflection forward. And if you want to stay connected, please follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Rate the podcast 5 stars wherever you listen. It helps other performers find these conversations. And share this episode with a friend who might need this reminder. You can also find wellbeing content, tips, and encouragement on Instagram and TikTok at Limitless Performing. Remember, growth isn't always visible. Success isn't always measured in roles or contracts. But every choice you make to care for yourself, to stay curious, and to nurture your craft is part of your progress. You are exactly where you need to be, and you're becoming exactly who you're meant to be. Until next time, keep showing up for yourself and keep building a life that supports the art you love.